What's up, everyone? It's been a while. I hope I don't do that again. Today, though, we are going to be getting into a pretty short book. You can see here, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Despite its brevity, it's going to give you a lot to think about. Specifically, the book is a lot about, at least in my opinion, the true nature of progress in the context of humanity. We'll get into that. So how I got the urge to read this was through Better Call Saul. I don't watch a lot of TV, but watched Breaking Bad. It was amazing. Then I watched Better Call Saul. It was also really good. And I started noticing after some point in the story, next to Jimmy, where he sleeps in his nightstand. Before I get into all of this, there are going to be spoilers for both Better Call Saul, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. So this is a video for somebody that either is already familiar with both, maybe somebody that doesn't really care about spoilers and has heard about these, but they don't want to go through the hours of reading the whole book and watching the whole series. And even though you'll notice it's kind of uncomfortable to make a connection between these two, not because of anything crazy, more because the themes that it presents in the show are very different from what the book is about. But even though it'll be brief, we'll still make a connection. And maybe I'll talk about the actual show without having to relate it to the book in the future, because it might be interesting. But yeah, after a certain point in the series, you start seeing the book next to Jimmy or Saul Goodman, next to his nightstand, and in other places as well. Then here's heavy spoilers, because even though the connections are brief, you got to talk about the ending. Towards the finale, he brings this up to Mike. He asks him what he would do or what he would change if he had a time machine. He also does this with Walter White. Then there's a very interesting part of the show, I think all the way at the end. Jimmy is leaving his brother's house in a flashback, and his brother is telling him to stay and to let him check some of the papers that he's been working on, because he's smelling something weird that Jimmy's doing, and Jimmy is abruptly trying to leap, you know what I mean? At this, Chuck's reaction, the brother, is kind of a laugh, but he's also pretty disappointed, and it's just something that he expected, He sees Jimmy leave, and as he's closing the door, he has a copy of The Time Machine, and he walks into his house. So after seeing it so many times in the show and referenced and being a key part of the regrets of Saul, I was this sounds interesting. Time in itself is pretty interesting. I felt the show was basically telling me to read it, so I did. So this little book, I don't know if you can take it in as a prophecy, but it certainly feels ahead of its time. There's something a little later that relates to this point that I also find interesting. Little to do with the actual plot, so we'll briefly mention that. But yeah, with all that being said, let's get right into the story. The story begins with a gathering of guests in the house of the time traveler. That's how we're gonna know the main character of the story throughout the whole thing. He's supposed to be this eccentric inventor. The people that are there are a medical professional, a psychologist. There is an editor. There's this guy that they say is a redhead. I don't know if they say what he does. He's a contrarian towards everything. And what they truly represent is different ways that society reacts to innovation and progress, and basically the reaction to groundbreaking ideas, right? And so you have the public opinion is supposed to be the editor, I guess. And then you got how a scientist and with his practical mind would react to it. You have skepticism and curiosity and all these different mix of emotions. And these guys all represent that individually pretty clearly, Skepticism is still what you feel the most from the group. Now, the guests are all waiting for the time traveler, who randomly pops into the room. And he also has this weird little contraption of brass that nobody knows what it is. Now, he introduces a concept to them that is pretty hard to believe, at least at the time. And he says that there are 4 dimensions. 3, which we call the 3 planes of space, and the 4th dimension of time. Especially at the time, dude, reading this has to get you questioning, the nature of reality, for sure. Remember how I mentioned that this book seems somewhat ahead of its time? The Time Machine was published in 1895, and the special theory of relativity was introduced in 1905. Now, with saying that, I don't know if like there was like some teaser trailers of relativity that Einstein was dropping, and that's how he got inspired, or more than likely it was like, you know, already something that was being discussed pretty heavily. But still, the one that we kind of follow today was introduced 10 years after this, and is similarly conceptualized as time as like a fourth dimension. I don't know if that's really that important, but I thought it was pretty cool. I thought that you might think it was cool too. Now, with that, I do want to clear up. What I'm linking to relativity here is like conceptualizing the fourth dimension as time, not time travel. That's a different subject. Remember the small little like brass device that the time traveler had? Well, it's actually like a working model of a time machine. It has like these levers, like crystalline levers, and you move it forward, you go forwards in time, backwards you go back. It's easy peasy, bro. He somewhat explains the mechanics. I mean, as much as you can explain the mechanics for time travel. I mean, but he says that the object can move through time as one can move through space. He starts it up, moves the lever, and the thing vanishes before everybody's eyes. Now, the group is still somewhat divided. They're pretty surprised, for sure. There's a part of the group that still thinks it's a trick. There's also like genuine curiosity here. The time traveler at this point, trying to like further prove what he's doing, takes them to another room where there's a full-size model of the time machine. And this one has like space for like a passenger. Now this makes the group feel, at least to me, the narrator specifically, which is also in the group, kind of seems to have like a genuine curiosity for things. There might be another character that does as well that I don't remember here, but now at this point you can feel like a general like skepticism. Some of them are like openly mocking it, like they're pretty sarcastic. I think like the redhead guy and the editor. The skepticism here is pretty interesting. Like you could say, like, even if it is a commentary on like how humanity takes groundbreaking ideas, you could say like, well, but that's an idea that you should be skeptical about, right? But that is something that like, at least in that specific situation, even if you have like some level of skepticism, I would still have curiosity. So on one hand, I understand like the reluctance of, you know, accepting anything that challenges the understanding of something like as fundamental as that. But presented with like something tangible like this, not being curious, and it almost felt like, oh, if you weren't skeptical like entirely about this, like thinking it's a trick, that you were just going to be seen as dumb. I think that's also a mistake. They obviously can't know if the time traveler is just pulling a trick. But I think the right attitude, at least with these types of things, would be the time travelers, which is just, I want to learn how it is all the way through till the end. And if it's a dead end, it's a dead end, you know what I mean? But he's an adventurous spirit for sure. So everybody leaves. I think it's implied that the time traveler is going to use the machine. Everybody else leaves his house, and the narrator is in a cab on his way back with one of the other characters, I don't remember, and they're discussing it. Yeah, the narrator still shows a little bit of that curiosity mixed with the skepticism. Some time passes, and there's like another reunion at that. Most of the same characters are there, and there's like another guy that's there, but like even in the book they say like, oh, he never speaks, and I don't even know if he ever says anything. But yeah, I thought you should maybe know. They're at the dining hall enjoying a meal, and what they see is the door opening, the time traveler, and like destroyed clothes, just like his clothes are ripped apart. He has no shoes on, he's all dirty, he looks like all scratched up, and that he hasn't slept in a while. He kind of like just brushes off the concerns of his peers, I guess, but like even they notice like he has like this ravenous hunger, like a carnivorous animal, because like what he really is focusing on is on the meat. After, you know, enjoying his meal a lot, he takes like center stage, and he just tells the people, listen, I will tell you what happened, but you have to listen to me in silence. If you interrupt me, it's over. I traveled in time and I will tell you that story right now. Again, I think it's the editor. He's like giving smirks to everybody, like with this little tone that he has. It is said by the narrator that almost immediately everybody was like really entranced with the story and fascinated with what the time traveler was saying. So the time traveler begins telling his story. We go back to after the people first left his house. He's there in his time machine. He pulls the levers and he launches himself into time. The experience is like mentally and like interestingly physically overwhelming. Like he feels it after. He describes that as the machine starts picking up the speed at which it travels through time. He saw the sun racing across the sky like increasingly fast to a point where like night and day mixed and it was like a shadow. He talks about seeing these huge buildings rising and falling, civilizations rising and falling. Maybe already hinting a little bit at like how humanity's like influence and like their permanence isn't really that strong. After the crazy journey, he arrives 800,000 years into the future. It's like 800,700 years into the future, something like that. What he sees it's stunning, but it also like immediately sets up a mystery. The earth is pure. It's like a green paradise. Almost, it's basically untouched by like any sort of industry. There is right next to where he arrives, I was gonna say spawns, there's this huge white sphinx that seems to just be like randomly placed there in like the middle of a field. But the time traveler can't really think for long. He notices these creatures, these like small pale creatures approaching him. At first, when they get near him, they seem really frail and strange. So they do like unnerve him. But after a little bit, like mostly just their demeanor that's like so gentle and like childlike just got him to relax. These little pale creatures are the Eloi. We're going to be talking about them a lot more in a little bit. The time traveler attempts as best he can to communicate with the Eloi, but he's met with them just like laughing at him, like leaving him to like go play. Yeah, basically showing him that they don't really care that much. Almost like a kid that doesn't understand the gravity or relevance of certain situations. It's kind of like the meme that sometimes goes around there that's like, my family going through great financial stress, me at 6 years old, Mom, if you don't buy me McDonald's, I'm like projectile vomiting all over the walls or something. I don't know if that's the meme. If it's not, it should be. But yeah, it's kind of like the vibe that he gets from them. Something that really shakes him, because what he imagined was arriving to a future where man was a master of his domain. If not of his reality, at least of like what he could and what surrounded him, and that they were going to be wiser and appear more advanced. Instead, he's met with basically kids that only survive because the world is so kind to them that survival is like a guarantee. It requires no effort. So after reflecting on that a little bit, the Eloi take him to this huge building that seems abandoned, or at least that it hasn't been properly maintained for a while. And inside there, he sees that they have like this dining hall that's basically just this platform, and they have a bunch of cushions surrounding it. They all sit around it, and they have a bunch of fruit, only fruit. The fruit, there's like some of them that he kind of recognizes, and there's other ones that are like pretty alien to him. But yeah, he notices that like they just without like any ceremony start throwing fruit at their faces and eating like crazy. So he starts eating, but he questions again, what happened to humanity? And well, that's really the mystery at the heart of the story. And in a way, it's also how I'm gonna somehow link it to Saul in a different way than how it's more obviously represented in the series, I guess. But yeah, even though it's gonna take a little bit, we will definitely get into that. So the time traveler, after this, steps out of the building that also serves as like the Eloi's sleeping quarters. So just so you know. He walks around the landscape a little bit. He goes up to a well. That is another thing that is pretty particular about the future, because there seem to be these random wells spaced throughout the whole landscape. For humanity that, even though it's clearly declined, at some point should have reached a level of like comfortability that allowed for wells to be obsolete. You know, there were still many of them just littered around there. So he walks to one of these and he's just standing around and he thinks. He creates his first theory about what is going on. He says at this point in the story that he believed that humanity reached a peak scientifically and economically that allowed them to manipulate the environment to a degree where everything was just granted to you. You eliminate all struggles. There's no need to combat disease. Crops grow for you. You don't even have to do anything. And this just results in a perfectly controlled world with an abundance of resources for everybody. So the time traveler says that this came at a cost. And he posits that with like no real need for survival or pressure from nature. Humanity's physicality and their intelligence declined over generations. So you lose the qualities honed at the beginning through like adversity. And a gradual decline like that led to the Eloi. There are these like very fragile and intellectually childlike beings. He also says something like, initially these conditions created like a population boom, and as we grew less capable, there was like a corresponding decline. He believes that this is reflected with like the building that we talked about previously where they were eating. That is not the only one that's on the landscape, that there are several buildings like this, and all of these show that at some point we weren't capable of maintaining them and that they, stopped being useful in the same way to us. He also says that like between the Eloi, the male and the females are like indistinguishable. He says that traditional roles in any sense of the world 800,000 years into the future were completely abandoned. So that also changed the species. And he says that like behaviors or qualities associated with like aggression or competition that like maybe in his era, time traveler's era, would have been a positive, and this new era would have been maybe like useless, but most likely just detrimental. Now in this specific chapter, he does conclude by telling everybody, because remember that this is basically him telling the story to his guests. So he tells everybody that at this point in his journey, he had maybe a partial truth, but that he was still pretty wrong about what happened to humanity. So keep that in mind. It's the next day. But yeah, that's basically the theory that he has by this point, already admitting that it's not entirely true. The real solution to like the mystery is going to be a lot darker. As he's having these thoughts, he is interrupted, noticing that nightfall is approaching. He decides to check the spot where he arrived at with the time machine. He does not see it there. Now he's pretty far, so he like tries to lie to himself, and he's like, nah, that's not the spot. Let me just get closer. I'll probably see it. He gets closer and it's not there. Something I might have forgotten to mention was that he removes the crystalline levers that like allowed the time machine to get into the position to time travel. So the machine was moved in space in this time. It wasn't moved through time. Obviously, he doesn't know at this point what moved it. So he goes back into the building where the Eloi are, and he starts to like question them. Obviously, this doesn't make much sense, because even if they were as intelligent as a human from his era, they would not understand what he was saying at this point. But he notices pretty quickly that all they do is like laugh nervously, and some of them are like just straight up terrified like kids. So out of just like exhaustion from the actual time travel trip and all this news and like all the running around as well to like try to get some answers, the time traveler just falls asleep. It's nice to think about how like the time traveler comes from rationality, actual like curiosity and like genuine like hunger for like understanding what's around you. But the Eloi are so passive that even though they are kind in nature, they can't show enough emotional intelligence for like an urgent situation like this. So like if at least that part of the theory is right, like the part of like progress leading to all of this, humanity's progress led to like a complete lack of any meaningful connection being able to like exist between humans. Well, I don't know if meaningful is the right word, because if something that happens a little later, I think even then you catch my drift with like how the Eloi behave. They seem very indifferent because they simply don't understand the gravity of the situation. So the time traveler awakens and he decides to go back to the Sphinx. That's where he should be able to see the time machine. He sees that it's not there, but he notices that the Sphinx is built on top of like a bronze base. This base somehow seems hollow, and he thinks that he's hearing something coming from the inside of this base. So he assumes that this is the place where the time machine has been taken to. He sees like a couple of Eloi walking around. He tries to like ask him about the Sphinx with like what up until this point he like knows about the language, I guess. And pointing at it and stuff like that. And they like react like almost with disgust and leave. He sees another one that this time is just walking around alone and does the same thing, gets the same reaction, but gets mad at this and then just grabs the little guy and drags him around to the Sphinx to like actually start questioning him. But the Eloi shows him like just this like primal fear, and so he lets him go. Throughout all of this, like he remains sympathetic towards the Eloi deep down, because like they're humanity's like future, you know what I mean? They're very innocent, so like he feels some sort of remorse when things like these happen, like overpowering them. But I think one of the key things about the book is like how human nature is about like physically and like intellectually overpowering your fellow man however you can, and like positioning correctly to do that and all that. So I guess it goes with the theme, and that may be also how I kind of connected to Saul Goodman. We'll see. So after trying for a little bit to open the Sphinx, because there seems to be like some sort of door that like is on the front side of the base from what I understand, and it seems that it's a mechanism that only opens from the inside, but he tried to force it, he wasn't able to, and so he comes to like this realization, right, that it's a situation that first of all he doesn't understand at all, and second he has to keep in mind why he came here. If the time machine was there where he left it, he would just be trying to like study this future era of Earth, but since it disappeared, it like completely refocused the trip. So he says to himself that he needs to be patient and truly try to understand this world, and that knowledge will lead him eventually to the answers of where his time machine was taken to. So after this change in mindset, we jump a little bit in time, and the time traveler is in a river. I mean, I think he's just like chilling out, and he's observing this group of Eloi that are just in the river as well, like playing and like messing around. Suddenly, one of the female Eloi that we learn is named Weena starts drowning. Again, the rest of them seem to like not understand what's going on, and so like they just keep playing in the river like Yuppie, and like she just drifts away drowning, you know what I mean? The time traveler rushes to like help her out and rescues her. After this, she develops like a really deep like bond with him and sticks around and chases him around everywhere he goes. It's almost like a childlike devotion, right? He's a protective parent that she was lost and finally found him. It does like contrast a little bit with like how alien the rest of them really feel. And that's really the thing, especially with Weena's situation. It's like you have a society that through generations has lost completely the meaning of personal responsibility. And if nothing is required from you for millennia, it gets ingrained into just how you behave, I guess. But it's crazy that, like, at least in this scenario, creating a world that's so kind made humans so gentle, but at the same time unkind. There is a little incident that happens between this event that we just talked about and another pretty big event, which is the time traveler. I think it's at nighttime. He's just like looking out and he sees some pale ape-like creatures running up a hill. He can't really see very well what's going on, but he kind of like makes out like they're carrying something. It might even be a body, he says. He says that he blinks and they just disappear. He chalks it up to like his exhaustion and what's been going on, and then maybe he just saw like a ghost or something. At this part, it's good to mention that the place where the Eloi slept was known as a communal hall, at least to the time traveler. Now he notices that the remnants of the society that was once advanced enough to create all this lived mostly in like communal spaces. Now there are several references to like religious systems here, and it seems like, well, both ends were applied to the extreme. So you have the communal sleeping quarters, you have buildings that are completely abandoned, and it's basically what remains. One day, the time traveler is exploring the Great Hall, and he notices from the darkness a pair of eyes are staring at him. Big round eyes. They don't look human, and they don't look like they come from the Eloi. The Eloi are described as having like pretty tiny eyes, and like every like facial feature they have is like pretty tiny, I guess. So it's kind of confirming what he previously saw. As he approaches it, the creature darts away, and he sees that it's kind of like that same build of like the pale ape-like creature that he was seeing running up the hills that he thought was a ghost. The creature is clearly not made for the outside world. In the light, it's completely blind and is running into different parts of the ruin until eventually he makes it safely into one of the wells that we talked about previously, and he starts descending it. Finally, the time traveler is like, okay, now I gotta like know what this is. So he lights a match and he peers into the well, and he sees that he has like these metal rungs that you can go down. He also sees the creature like rapidly descending, but the match is running out, burns his fingers, so he strikes another one, and when this one lights up, the creature is already gone. He can't see it, but he does hear like a rumbling coming from under the earth, and he assumes that it's some kind of machinery. That's what it sounds like to him. This marks a turning point, because at least for the time traveler, this opened up a new possibility that kind of remains what his final theory is, and it's that humanity didn't just evolve into these delicate beings. There was initially a division between humanity. Each had their own different lifestyles, their own different purposes, if you would. And that division led to one side evolving into the Eloi and the other side evolving into the Morlocks, which are these pale ape-like creatures with the big eyes. We'll know more about the Morlock in a little bit. They, at least to him, and at this point, they appear to be very different from the Eloi. He doesn't believe that the Morlocks are going to share the same passive nature and gentle nature the Eloi have. But even from the beginning, it's going to suggest that the Eloi live above ground and they enjoy this new reality created by humanity. And then the Morlocks were a different class that were meant to be underground. The rumblings of the machines suggest that they were meant to be working and keeping up whatever need to be kept up to maintain the world as it was. So that's like presented a little bit more organized, kind of like how the time traveler does. For him, at least what he theorizes is that this future that he's observing from humanity came from the initial division that led to the creation of two different species. The Eloi are descendants of rich people, the affluent class. They live above ground, and theoretically initially they had access to anything that they wanted to study to be able to dedicate their life to the arts. But I guess that this existence, like really completely devoid of challenges, led them to be like frail and have a childlike intelligence. Now the Morlocks are the descendants of the working class that were supposed to live underground and toil on these machines to keep up the world, not only for them, but mainly for the Eloi that enjoyed upstairs. Now, generations of a subterranean existence made them very sensitive to light, And even though they don't seem to be like completely dumb, like the Eloi, they're certainly capable, but they have like this primal energy, right? Like they seem like to have this like animalistic efficiency. And even though they're clearly smarter than the Eloi are at this point, they also don't really have the empathy or the understanding of the past humans, no matter how funny that sounds, I guess. Us, dude. Kind of like the Eloi, they also seem to not really have that complete understanding of the situation. So about the subterranean infrastructure is like he hears the toil of the machines, but now clearly we know that the wells are connected to the world of the Morlocks, and that's the real purpose now. Is it just that? Is it their exit point? So was that created later? Like that's something that I don't really know how it works, but it's clearly something that they use. And the interesting part about this is that the whole landscape is littered with these. But there's not only this. There's also like some towers that have like no entrance or exits from the surface world. So you can assume that whatever goes inside them goes in from the underground. Now these towers at the top have like an open space. I guess that would count as like an exit or entrance in the surface, but you get what I mean, like it's not supposed to be. And then at the top you can see like heat emanating from them. So it has to be some sort of release, something that the machines do from underground. These are also littered throughout the whole landscape. So this is something that the time traveler theorizes that it's just worldwide. It's just a worldwide system underground that works like this. And then the people at the top were literally at the top, just in reaping the benefits of whatever was happening. So he also theorizes that the class divisions that he had in his time, we have in our time, and that humanity just had forever, just intensified as time kept going until the division was strong enough for something like this to happen. Now the time traveler says that they like both naturally adapted to their lives, and since there was like really no more progress to be had by the Eloi, they just settled into this with no responsibility and became what they became. And for the Morlocks, they also adapted after millennia. Now the story jumps again, and we're at the present. The time traveler clears up to his guests again, even though this theory is comprehensive, and it's basically already everything that his end theory is. He acknowledges that, first of all, there's a lot about this world that he clearly still doesn't understand, and that there might be more things lurking. Now this statement isn't just suggesting that like in the near future in the story that more revelations are going to come, because they are, and it's going to deepen this theory. Maybe not like deepen the theory, but like I would be more comfortable with saying like expanding its scope. But it's also just an honest statement about him saying that this is just what he sees. It could very well be that, and given the information, like, I mean, you kind of have to like see it kind of like that too, but that he's aware that there are many different factors that could come into this that change the situation. So yeah, I told you, it's like 100 pages, dude, but it's like, what happens if you never like check economic divides, you know, between people, and also about environments, like shaping physical and like intellectual capabilities of a creature over time. And the more and more you like delve into like rigid class systems, at least to like the extreme parts of it, it just leads to exploitation being easier. But all this is a pretty good theory. There's still something interesting that's going on, because if the Eloi are what in the past were the race that controlled and dominated the world, why are they afraid of the Sphinx? Why also, when the time traveler questions them about the wells, are they so scared? There is still something that happened to humanity that we don't know, but we'll know. This is also like when I was reading the book, where I could maybe start thinking about Jimmy or Saul Goodman. While I was reading it, I was really trying to see if there was any way to make a connection besides from there just being time travel. And we're gonna talk about Better Call Saul here, maybe in Breaking Bad, I don't know. He uses it at least in two key situations that I remember as a way to explore his deepest regrets. Both times he asks a similar question. One time to Walter White and one time to Mike. I forgot Mike's last name, dude. I feel bad about that. Mike was a cool character. But yeah, he asks them if they had a time machine, what's the one thing that they would change? As soon as I realized that this book went into the future and that it wasn't really going to go into the past anytime soon to like explore regrets, I was like, okay, so it's just like the time machine thing. Obviously Saul to these, he would always say something dumb having to do with like money. I think he said like, oh, I would bet on like a team or something to win the World Series. I don't know. But knowing where he got the interest in this book from, when we check that final scene and Chuck having the book in his hands, it seems like him relating regrets in that book seems to be like his relationship with Chuck and not being able to fix it, at least until that point in the story, was that big regret. Now hear me out for a second. Could you say that could it be that Jimmy from this story understood for him there wouldn't be any time machine that he could utilize to go and fix his mistakes? Those mistakes stayed there. And a lot of the times things that happened to him were because of him trying to navigate a very rigid like social structure that at least existed for him in his environment. He got shut down. It seemed like trying to do things the right way never worked. And so if you read a story like this and you're convinced that no matter how much progress humanity makes, we will never reach a point where it's equal for everybody, where everybody has the same playing field, and where everybody can enjoy existence in the same way. If the end game of humanity is truly this, it's just sad. At the end of the book, the narrator makes a comment that we will also talk about, because I also think it relates to this. But it's kind of like two different perspectives that you can use to look at this. The time traveler sees what this rigidity and this separation between different humans did to us. And Jimmy, if convinced, could create his personality of Saul Goodman as a rebellion against this rigid system to kind of break how it's structured. Because kind of relating to what is said at the end of the book that we'll explore more in depth, you're alive anyway. You're alive in this era, so you just got to make the most of it. And if you can't really find meaning, maybe it was just like a last act of vengeance against how we exist. You're suffering to keep up and do things the right way for progress. Progress that you won't see, but that you're chipping into because it's your responsibility as part of the race. But if the result of all that progress is just a more exaggerated cartoon version of the separation that we already have, if like humanity's peak is truly meant to be so finite, then I think he just went Joker on him, bro. So after formulating his theories, the time traveler decides that it's time to confront these wells and to descend into the underground machine world dominated by the Morlocks. And so despite Weena being horrified at him going down and the other Eloi also, being very scared about it, he starts descending. So he starts using the metallic rungs that we described previously, and he describes the air getting colder, darkness growing more and more present. He also describes how long the descent is and how taxing it is physically for him. He gets to the bottom and the sound from the machinery is now very, very loud. He can see them. He doesn't really understand what they're for. Traversing all of this, he sees the Morlocks. He's lighting matches to help with the visibility, and he sees them sometimes peering at him from the distance. Whenever the matches run out, they start to approach him. At the beginning, he would make like abrupt noises, and they would sometimes disperse. But now they were just like starting to laugh, and so he would like have to turn on a match so that the glare would make him skedaddle. In one of the huge chambers, he sees like a little platform, and on top of it, he sees like slabs of raw meat. He acknowledges that he hasn't really seen any livestock anywhere, so he's acting, I think, as if he doesn't understand immediately what this means. But yeah, you can tell it's pretty dark. And don't worry, we'll get confirmation of all of this just a little bit further into the story. But after noticing that the Morlocks are getting increasingly comfortable with touching him up, and he says that their touch feels like almost like dead, like very cold. He decides that it's time to leave. He lights up a match, starts traversing back, starts getting closer to the well, but now they all get on top of him when the lights go out. This time it's not just curious, they seem to be trying to pull him back. So he struggles with them for a while, turns on another match, and starts ascending the well. There is one of them that is more persistent, so he keeps chasing him, but he like kicks him down. So I think the Morlock even takes off his shoe, but he falls down. And so he just continues to go up without stopping until he reaches the surface. At the surface, he meets Weena and some other of the Eloys that were just like observing, but Weena's like very happy to see him. So now the time traveler understands a little better why the Eloi seem to be scared of the dark, why they sleep all together, and why they are also absolutely terrified of the underground world. But he says that unlike them, he comes from an era that will make him fight against the threats. So at least in his mind, he knows that he needs to find a place where he feels safer. He needs to find a weapon. And after both of these things are secured, then he needs to get his time machine back. So, accompanied by Weena, he sets out to find something that he calls the Palace of Green Porcelain. It was a structure that he had seen before, just looking around. And that had piqued his interest because it seemed to be made of exactly that, green porcelain. Also, during this journey, he mentions how important Weena was for him throughout everything. Her companionship and like her overall affection really helped him get through like all this craziness, and like more than anything, the loneliness of being like so separated from like what's human, or what, at least what used to be human, you know? He also takes this moment to, in the present, to take out of his pocket a little flower that Weena had given to him because she didn't know what pockets would for. So throughout the journey, she just like picked up flowers and put them in his pocket. The psychologist even mentions that he doesn't really know what that flower is. It seems to be very like alien looking, so it seems to be like some sort of proof of his journeys. I mean, it's not really that concrete, but something. The time traveler also refuses to give the flower to anybody, like to keep. It's understandable because he seemed to appreciate the connection that he developed with Weena. Going back to the story though, before getting to the palace that they can already see, they have to get through a forest. Nighttime is approaching and it's already pretty dark, so the forest seems like a prime place for the Morlocks to be hanging around, especially during nighttime. So he decides to camp out right before getting to the forest. They rest, the night passes uneventfully, and after that they decide to traverse the forest. During the daytime is a different story, like it feels much more inviting, and they find fruit, and they even see like other Eloi hanging around, I think. So they eat some of the fruit, and then they keep going until they reach the palace. So our protagonist and Weena make it to the Palace of Green Porcelain, and they discover that it's a museum. Almost everything is completely destroyed by the passage of time, but they still somewhat explore it. They find a section that has like machinery, and even though the time traveler doesn't understand what most of them are for, he tries to like puzzle it together. This is what interests him most. He notices that Weena is a little like weary about the situation. He sees that specifically the machinery section of the museum descends. It goes into complete darkness, where he sees in the dust small footprints. These have to be the Morlocks. So he decides to grab like a big lever out of one of the machines and twist it in a certain way where he can like pull it out, and now he has like a metal like crowbar thing that he can use to defend himself. They get out of this section, they go to a library where almost every book is like completely disintegrated at this point. It really likes to hint at like the impermanence of like our achievements. After that, they go to like this chemistry lab section, and they find like a preserved box of matches, which is perfect for him because he had been wasting them before and noticing that they were good for the Morlocks, so this is going to come in handy. And he also sees another sealed container that has camphor, so that's going to be great either for like a torch or anything that you just like want to light up and keep it lit for a while. Night is approaching, so he needs to search the palace for a good place to stay, but he's planning on getting to the Sphinx the next morning and retrieving his time machine, escaping this future era with Weena and going back to his present time. Again, it's kind of the same to what we were talking about Saul previously, which is if you were to know for sure, or to be convinced this was the future result of everything we do. It's just so disappointing. It's hard to, like, at least to some degree, not be somewhat nihilistic about it, right? You are currently in an era where you most likely won't find out about the secrets that humanity's prime will have access to. You're in an era that's working to create a path for that to be a possibility. And in the end game is us just devolving into a caricature of that. So although I still think it would be best to, like, approach it as, like, making the best of it, it's still, like, pretty numbing, I guess. So they do not find any place that would be suitable to stay and to avoid the Morlocks. So the time traveler decides that with his matches and with a camphor and with his crowbar, that he can now traverse the forest during the nighttime and just go straight to the White Sphinx so that he can leave this place. And that's what they attempt to do. They start their journey, and the time traveler is picking up, like, firewood, just in case at any point he has to set up and create, like, a campfire so that the Morlocks don't approach. While he's doing that, nightfall is here, and immediately he starts sensing the eyes looking at him from the trees in the darkness. When he notices that they have him encircled, he makes the decision of dropping all the firewood that he had been collected, because there would be no time to set up. As he's doing this, the Morlocks are, like, reaching at Weena, trying to get her. The time traveler has finally realized that the Morlocks now see the Eloi, which used to be the ruling class, as food. And he realizes that one of the things that kept this symbiosis working was that while both of these classes were still intelligent beings, there had to be a way to control the class that was going to be toiling away underground. So somehow, the time traveler doesn't say exactly how, but he theorizes that the overworld controlled the food supply to the underworld. As their capabilities waned, that food stopped coming. So the underworld Morlocks, they started starving, and even though it goes against maybe human nature, at this point they're not even the same species, and they both lost really their ability to judge this situation any differently. So now their Eloi are just prey animals to the Morlocks. Not only that, he theorizes that they might, like, even breed them and, like, keep them, you know, kind of happy in the overworld, and then they just kind of have them like a farm. So as they try to, like, grab her, he starts like an improvised fire with the camphor, and he just darts away. The Morlocks get freaked out by this, obviously. During this, he notices that Weena completely fainted from, like, fear. And so he puts her on the ground, he lies next to her, and he thinks that he will not fall asleep and that he will just wait for her to wake up. But since it's already nighttime and another day has passed and he's just completely exhausted, without wanting to, he falls asleep. He awakens directly under attack by the Morlocks. He feels his pockets and the matches are not there. Luckily, in the struggle, on the ground, he feels the iron bar that he had pulled from the machine. And so he picks it up and he starts clocking the Morlocks with it. During all of this, he notices, like, a glare coming from the forest. And he notices that the fire that he had previously started and that he ran away from had grown and was completely engulfing the whole thing. The flames advancing make the Morlocks that were close to him panic. But he also notices that, like, throughout all this chaos, Weena is not there with him. He runs from the flames. The Morlocks are not even paying attention to him. So at first he's hitting them because he thinks they are going for him. But then he notices the, like, absolute despair that the creatures have at the situation. And they're not necessarily evil, but they do, like, disgust him in a way. Even though, like, there is, like, an intellectual understanding of, like, what happened and, like, why they exist and everything, he still mirrors the Eloi a little bit in that sense. He emerges from the forest and he's looking at the destruction. The Morlocks, there's like 50 of them just going crazy and howling at what's going on. They don't even understand. And he's just there, shocked, grieving for Weena. He says to himself that the only positive about the situation is that they probably just left her in the fire. Somehow that's, like, not as bad. But he says that, like, at least her fate wasn't to be, like, slain and eaten by the Morlocks. This book is not, like, super dark, but it does have its parts where, like, it makes you feel a little empty. So Weena was, like, a little bit of, like, a release from that. Her being, like, so innocent and so, like, devoted to the time traveler. I hate how she went, dude. I don't think she had to go, but yeah, it wouldn't make that dynamic of the story being unbelievable work anymore, like if you actually brought her back from the future, you know. But yeah, even though he's grieving for her and he's shocked, he is out of the forest now, and as morning approaches, he is decided to get to the White Sphinx, and he is sure that with his crowbar, he will be able to open the bronze doors and get it back. So he's getting close to the White Sphinx, and he's thinking about how he's going to get in. But as he approaches, he notices that the bronze doors are open. At first, he thinks it's like a surrender from the Morlocks, and then he understands that it's a trick. But he drops his crowbar, because during the journey back, he noticed that there had been a couple matches that had like jumped out from the box that the Morlocks stole. So he had them like in his pocket. So he drops the crowbar as if that was going to like convince the Morlocks that they had tricked him. And then he was going to be like, haha, I got a match, dog. He goes in, and immediately the bronze panel's shut, and it's like complete darkness. He can hear the Morlocks literally laughing at him like, bro, you're a dumbass. And so he gets the match out from his pocket, and he starts to like strike it with like his pant or something. He's like, oh dude, these are one of those dumb matches that you can only strike with a box. Brother, could you have checked that before attempting this mission, dog? Like, he was so proud of being so smart. And the Morlocks, they're literally just like, they're hunting you as if you were a Eloy, bro. Like, no diff. Thank God you're like 5 times the size from what I understand of the story. So he's like literally just fighting against them because the time machine is in the middle of the room. Forgot to mention that. And so he's like throwing him off of him. And he like yanks the levers and launches himself even further into the future. But he escaped. So now, before getting into this next little jump through time that he does, the book says that the time traveler noticed that the time machine was cleaned and oiled up. So he thinks that they took it apart to maybe try to understand what it was. Hinting at like the fact that he didn't really get how much intelligence the Morlocks actually kept. Or maybe developed again after they were left without resources. If you think about it, like the Morlocks, they're obviously not evil. Like without sustenance, they literally had to do something or just disappear. Which just instinctively, that wouldn't have been the choice made by all of them. So you have to understand them. At the same time, they're described as like having huge eyes without lids. Sometimes they describe them as like pale ape-like creatures. Sometimes they describe them as like spider humans. I also understand being afraid of them or being somewhat like repelled by them, as the time traveler is. They would also probably eat you. He also, again, kind of like completes his theory. So he talks again about like how the separation between the classes just intensified throughout time, eventually leading to the separation of humanity and the subsequent like devolution, I guess, into different species. But he adds now how after a while the decline of the Eloy directly led to the Morlocks not being able to eat, and that led to the Morlocks now having to farm the Eloy basically as food. It might have just been a worry by the author of like how our social structure, in his opinion, could lead to like a dystopian outcome. And so many things that you can think about, dude. It's such an interesting little book. Like, is it karma what happened to the Eloy? Is it just nature? Is it how it always ends for intelligent species? And regardless of like if you think that this is plausible or not, it's still, I think, pretty interesting and poses a lot of like cool questions. But yeah, he thrusts the levers forward and he escapes the Morlocks by jumping forwards in time. He goes into the distant future and like you can see how gradually the earth is declining. He arrives at like a desolate beach. There's like a enlarged red sun that he can see from here. So like at this point, like even our earth and our solar system are getting old and tired and are reaching their end. He can still see some life. He sees like some huge crab creatures like scuttling around. I don't know if this is like the origin. Like this is the first like carcinization meme. Being a crab is like the end goal of evolution. So I don't know. Maybe you can confirm that for me. But yeah, he had not noticed before, and one of them is like behind them really close. So he freaks out and he jumps again into the future. He arrives at the same beach. he notices that the sun looks even bigger. At this point, there's like a thin layer of ice in the ocean. It's partially covered in ice. So it's beginning to freeze. Everything just seems completely dead. Almost at the end, giving up, he sees like on the shore, like in a part of the ocean that wasn't completely frozen, a small like black tentacle squid creature like hopping around. So life had not completely been extinct, but it was not what we previously knew. He feels pretty tired, and time traveling is taxing, but he feels like he cannot stay in this era, and I don't blame him. So he just hops back into the machine and goes back to his time. I don't know, dude. It's entropy. It's like no matter how good the system is, you try to organize it, but nature is just chaotic. So if you can't master that concept, no matter how good the system is, it ends as it is intended to end naturally. So existence in nature is like transient, and you cannot perpetuate the prime that was reached, at least not in this scenario. And at that point, things just keep going, you know? And is it all just that, dude? Is it just like a happy coincidence? Kind of like, oh, you're throwing pens at like a beer bottle, and like, oh, one went in. It's like it's a happy coincidence, but does it really have any significance beyond that, you know? And is everything we do just that? Maybe. I mean, even then, it's not meaningless. At least I don't think it is. But it's cool to think about. So the time traveler makes it back to his house. He's not in his original position where the time machine left, because the Morlocks had moved it inside the Sphinx, so it's in a slightly different position inside the house. He exits and he notices that it's exactly the day where his guests were supposed to come to the house so that he could tell them about his travels. He can hear them speaking in like the dining hall, and so he approaches, and that's where we get the scene where he appears and they look at him all raggedy and he eats a bunch of meat. Now, after the story, even though all of them were completely entranced and they still cannot figure out what the flower is, most of them are still pretty skeptical, and the editor says something like, oh dude, you should write books or something. Pretty meta. The narrator is very, very curious, and I think he just straight up believes. So he goes back the next day to visit the time traveler and maybe get some more answers. He cannot find them, so he goes to the room where the time machine is, and he's like checking it out. As he exits that room, he finds the time traveler, who tells him that he's sorry, but he's very busy right now, and that he will come back with tangible proof of his travels. He has a camera, and he says that, I don't know, but he'll bring like pictures and something else to prove. I think he says like a live specimen or something like that, but don't quote me on that, I don't remember exactly. After that, he goes into the room, closes the door, and the narrator remembers that he has like a reunion or something, so he opens the door real quick to tell the time traveler that he'll leave for a while, but the machine disappears and he's gone. Now we go to the epilogue, and it's been like 3 years. The time traveler has not returned. The narrator wonders what happened, if he went into the past and he got killed by like some Stone Age people, or by like some dinosaur or maybe he went into the future, into a time where humanity was in its prime, and it was just so good that he couldn't leave. It is also revealed that the narrator kept the flowers that Weena had given to the time traveler. And he says that even though they're withered, they're like still proof that even with mind and strength gone, gratitude and like a mutual tenderness were still present in the heart of man. I like that quote, dude. It's so cute, especially remembering Weena. She was so nice. It's also kind of that it was like, oh yeah, maybe you can build like a super deep connection, but it still shows you that we changed, but it was still us, bro. It was still us. With all the bleakness that comes with an idea like this, I thought that being what remained in us, that allowed for there to be like some sort of connection still, that's pretty cool. He also says something else that's really interesting. He knows that the time traveler thought but cheerlessly of the advancement of mankind, and saw in the growing pile of civilization only a foolish heaping that must inevitably fall back upon and destroy its makers in the end. So he says that there was something that they talked about even before the time traveling. What he saw was just a confirmation of his thoughts about the nature of progress and of our existence. The narrator says that if that is so, it remains for us to live as though it were not so. I think he has the best way to look at it, for sure. The only way to look at it, if you were to confirm something like this and still want to have a fulfilling life. The time traveler, though, also has a point. I mean, he saw it happen. He confirmed it. Even though this video was more about the time machine, I still want to go back a little bit and circle around to Saul Goodman and how this connects somehow. And yeah, you might have been convinced that this was just how reality works, and that this was our future, and that our destiny is that our future is for everything that we create to collapse upon ourselves and eventually destroy us. And if that's like the reality that you're accepting, then there's different ways to look at it. For sure, one would be the narrator's way to look at it. That's just to make the best of it and to just keep living and trying to progress humanity, even if you've realized that that's the end game, because there's still some meaning in it, in trying to do it and trying to fulfill that. Maybe there's still a chance, who knows? However way you look at it, to still be able to live a fulfilling life, even if it's from a nihilistic perspective, that is a way. There is also the way of looking at it as, well, then what's the point? And if you're somebody like Saul, that went through all those things in like a short period of time, and that kind of molded his brain into thinking that things were set up in a way that for a guy like him, it just wasn't made for him to live the life that he wanted, or to be seen as he wanted to be seen. And if there's really no end goal, and the end point is so bleak, then you could look at it as holding on to keeping in line with that structure might not even be a noble thing. It's not good at all. It's pointless. So rebelling against that structure might be your only way to find meaning in whatever is left. It's kind of a stretch, but I mean, it did appear in the series, so I wanted to do something about it that wasn't just about like, oh, there's time travel, so even though this story is about like going into the future and the impermanence of like human advancements and what like rigid social structures can lead to, since it has time traveling, we can just make it about like our regrets and what would we do if we can travel into the past. I wanted to make it a little more complete. And I also wanted to talk about this book because, I mean, a series that I loved made me read this. And it's something that I think I probably wouldn't have read if not for that, at least for a while, because even though I like sci-fi, it's kind of that. I don't think it would have piqued my interest like that. It had been a while without me uploading. And this was the one that I kind of wanted to make. So I'm glad that I finally focused my time on it, and I had a lot of fun making this, so I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to subscribe so you can see future content, and with all that being said, I'll see you guys next time.